All right. So thanks everyone for joining today. Today we have an amazing personality with us today at the CMS Connect Delta event. Tim McDonald is an amazing personality. I've just had the opportunity to meet him recently. And from the work he does, he is just one amazing, phenomenal person. So I'm just going to leave him to tell us a little bit about his work, and then we can get into the conversation today. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, I live in Tampa, Florida. My name's Tim McDonald, and I have over 15 years in the community experience, but it all started when I joined Social Media Club in Chicago when I lived there. And I was in real estate at the time and just found it a way to connect with people. But one thing I did a lot differently with social media at the time was I really built relationships on it instead of just tried to market or sell people stuff. And I quickly got invited to the board of directors for Social Media Club in Chicago. We were one of the world's largest chapters. We had about 150 people each month, and they appointed me as a director of communications. And I just realized after about a week of doing what I was doing that there was so much more than just communications. There was, volunteer coordination, event planning, email, marketing, social media marketing, customer service, handling, event registrations, everything else. And so it was just like, I was wearing a lot more hats in communication, and heard the phrase community and started really researching that. Now, back 15 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of people talking about community management back then. So I actually started a site called My Community Manager, and we hosted when Google had Google Plus at the time. We actually started doing Google Hangouts and broadcasting them, and connected with other community managers around the world. And that ended up getting me a job at HuffPost when they launched HuffPost Live, their live streaming network. And then I got promoted to the director of community. And ever since then, I've just been working for a mix of clients, anywhere from, Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits to, social impact communities, consumer brands, tech companies, you name it, I've been involved with. And I've gotten to travel the world to give talks and workshops on community. So this is just really exciting to be here, and especially with the topic of embracing the power of belonging, which I think is a key component to just about any successful community.
Wow, interesting. It's been an amazing journey for you in community, starting over 15 years ago, where community was not even a thing at that time, really, And then I read about your work at HuffPost, Huffington Post, and then how you were able to transform attendance on the live event. It's amazing what you do, and that brings me to the point of embracing the power of belonging. In terms of the inherent need for humans to be part of something, to fill the void, to close the social gap, to maintain mental health, and all of the other intricate part that we as humans need to survive in a socially relevant life. So I'll just leave you to it. You run us through what you have for us today on embracing the power of belonging. How do we as community leaders do that, basically?
Yes. And let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen here. And
Okay.
there we go. So we're up there now. So you can see, the topic which you've already introduced. And I want to start by telling a story, because about 3 years ago, almost to the day, in 2 more days, I will be a 3-year survivor of colorectal cancer. And I was stage 4, which means it metastasized to my liver. I had about a 15% chance of surviving. And I'm never one who believes in the odds, but this is a picture from one of the first events I went to with a lot of other colorectal cancer patients. It's in the US, we have what our government is run by what we call Congress. Most of you probably know the president, but we know we have a Congress. And so our events, when we want to ask our Congress members to make change, is called Call on Congress, where people from all over the United States travel. And then you get together in small groups and go call on your representatives from your state to ask them for changes that you're looking in some of the laws and funding that you're looking for. And why I'm sharing this picture and this story is because it was the first time I was around a bunch of other colorectal cancer patients. Now, if you have not, or your family has not been impacted by colorectal cancer or any cancer and been on chemo, you may not understand this, but many of the things that we go through as patients is the side effects of chemo. One, have a lot of bathroom issues, meaning we have to go a lot. It gives you a lot of diarrhea, a lot of constipation. And so you might be in the bathroom sometimes for 20 to 30 minutes, like multiple times in a row, depending on, how the side effects hit you. And the other thing that really happens is chemo really fatigues you and makes you tired. And so when you're at an event like this, your energy, you have to really keep up and be able to, let people see the best side of you and your best personality, but that really drains you even more the more you do. So we're very tired and fatigued during events like this, especially. And so those two things combined, anytime before this event, if I was in the bathroom for 30 minutes, somebody would come ask me, or I'd come out and be like, is everything okay? Or is anything going wrong? And if I were to say in the middle of the afternoon, out of a big group of people at an event, that I need to go lay down, they all would have thought I was crazy. Like, why are you taking a nap when you have this prime opportunity to connect with people right here? But in this particular group, you could say you were going to the bathroom, come back 45 minutes later, nobody looked at you strange. You could go say, I just need to go lay down. And everybody said, I get it. Go ahead. We'll see you later. And it was the first time that I ever felt like I found my people. They didn't look at me weird. They didn't treat me weird, because everybody there knew what I was going through. And so it's just a story of, and this is only like last March, of this year. So this is like one of the first times where I was surrounded by people that I felt got me with my cancer diagnosis and what the side effects of my chemo treatment were. Because if you're in a general group of people, they don't understand. And when you're with people that are going through the same thing, they understand. And I think that's the essence of community. We're all coming together around a shared purpose and to deliver a shared outcome. And so we all kind of understand, even though for as unique as we all are, we're all very, very similar in our needs. And so that's just, one story of a sense of belonging that I got through one of the communities that I belong to. So what I'd ask you to do right now is just think of a community that you belong to that gives you a sense of belonging. Not one that you run, but one that you belong to. And if you have one, go ahead and put it in the chat. But really what I'm wanting you to do is start thinking about this in your head. So as I go through this presentation, you can associate it with other communities that you belong to and see what they're doing and how you can apply that to your communities that you're running. And it's just so powerful, because I truly think, and Daniel, you're going to like what I come up with next. And as I talk about how do we create this for our communities, you actually gave a definition that is very close to me when you were talking about why belonging is so important. But let's go through how the dictionary defines belonging. And I think belong also belongs here too, because it really helps kind of get us in the focus of how this relates to communities. So belonging is a noun, which means an affinity for a place or situation. So we feel a real sense of belonging. If you have a community member in your community that says that they don't belong, that's a big problem, right? And so we really want to give them we want all of our community members basically to say this, that they feel a real sense of belonging. they feel an affinity for the space that you've created for them. But to belong is be a member or part of a particular group, organization, or class. And this wasn't in the dictionary, but we can put another comma in here and put community, right? Of a particular community. So when you are part of community, it gives you a sense of belonging. And I think that's why community is so important outside of audience. And I think a lot of people confuse community and audience, but in an audience, you don't feel a sense of belonging, right? You might for a minute, but that sense goes away. Like, let's just take a big sporting event that you go to, right? You go to the sporting event, everybody shows up, they watch the teams compete. You are there for a shared purpose, right? To watch that team. But after that event's gone, you go home and everybody else goes home. Nobody else is there. Where's that sense of belonging now? You don't have it, right? Now, you might, if you're a super fan and you belong to a community of super fans, you might have that sense of belonging, but that differentiates you, the community, from the audience, everybody else that was in the stadium. So I think that's always important to kind of set the stage of what is a true community and what is an audience, because community delivers a sense of belonging. Audience doesn't necessarily convey that. And Daniel, to your definition, this has been, the bottom thing has been on my LinkedIn profile for over 10 years now. And this is exactly, I copied it. I didn't change it. I didn't do anything. It's been this way for this long. None of us are alone. That is my mission in life, to let everyone know they are not alone. It's why helping others do social good is my purpose. And I truly live, breathe, and believe in that. Because when we provide that sense of belonging, I think it's a core essence of what every human being is looking for in life, to feel like they belong to something. And there is a big opportunity for all the people that are out there that feel alone. And if you have a community, for you to be the one who kind of welcomes them in and lets them feel like they're not alone and gives them that sense of belonging in your community. So let's get into actually, how do you do this, right? It sounds easy, but it's very complex. It's not hard, it's just complex, right? As far as what we got to do. So the first thing I would say is listening, right? You cannot help somebody feel a sense of belonging if you don't listen. And I don't just mean with our ears, even though I got a big picture of an ear up here, right? But I mean, like, when you see a potential person who might be a member of your community, or a potential member of your community, or somebody just joined your community, in order to create that sense of belonging, instead of just giving them, hey, welcome, or hey, hello, or introduce yourself, that doesn't give them a sense of belonging necessarily on its own. But if you actually listen and pay attention to who this person is as a human, before you just give them your standard welcome, you can do this in many ways. I've done this for years, and it's easier for some people and more difficult for other people. But look at, like, if you're connecting on your platform, right? Have they commented before? What have they shared? Did they fill out their bio section? If they didn't, look at some of their social media profiles. Do they have a bio on there? Do they have a link to a website that you can go to and check out what they write about, what they talk about? And if all else fails, just Google search their name and see if you can find who that person is, right? Like, sometimes just knowing the location and the person's name is enough to give you a good insight. These aren't all the ideas, but you get the idea, right? You can add in your other things of ways that you can listen to what people are already telling you about themselves. Why is this so important? Because now, when you actually go to connect with that person, you have the opportunity to take something that you've read about them and welcome them in a way that makes them understand that you've already know a little bit about them and you're interested in learning more about what they're interested in. That's so much more powerful than just telling somebody to introduce themselves, right? If I can say, Daniel, I saw that you're really passionate about gaming, and we don't talk about that in here, but I got to tell you that this is my favorite game. What's yours? How much more welcome and a sense of belonging do you feel with that kind of welcome rather than just me saying, Daniel, welcome? Another thing that I say, and you just saw me use it in the example that I just gave, is use their name. I learned this from a good friend of mine, Angela Myers. She's an educator and now she's a public speaker that goes out and talks about this. Really, her two favorite words are "you matter," telling people and giving them a sense of belonging through the words "you matter." But the other thing, when I was at an event with her with all these middle school age students, that came in the day after the school was over, they voluntarily came in and almost everybody came to work on a project. And one of the things that she told me during this thing is, Tim, make sure you always use their name, because when you use somebody's name, they know that you know who they are. They know that you're talking to them. There is nothing more powerful than using somebody's name. Now, when we're doing this online, especially if we're looking at social media profiles, a lot of people have different names. Like my Twitter handle is TA McDonald. I can't tell you how many people call me Tam instead of Tim, TAM instead of TIM. Do I get upset about it? No. They're making an effort. But if I see something like that, right, and I'm not able to go through the information and find out that hey, a lot of times TA McDonald, but if you look right under that, it says my full name, right, Tim McDonald. So just taking that extra time to see that will help you understand that you can call me Tim instead of Tam. But sometimes, like, they don't give their real name, or you're not sure if it's their real name, right, because it doesn't match the user profile name. But what you can do then, and I love doing this, is say, I'll just use myself as an example, right? Let's just say I didn't have Tim McDonald under TA McDonald. What I would do then is I would say, hey, it's good to meet you. I'm not sure if your first name is Tam. If not, what is it? But that lets the person know that you paid attention to them. They are already feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of importance, because you actually gave them an opportunity to now, you took a stab at what their name might be, but you can respond with what it actually is now. It's a great tool that I've used. Sometimes their name's not always there, but if not, just let them know that you've done the research and can't find it and are interested in knowing it. And when you do that, 90% of the times they will give you their name. It's an amazing thing. And then you can start calling them by that name, even though nobody else knows it. So that even gives them a bigger sense of belonging and importance in the community, because you're somebody that has their name that they don't make public to everybody else. The other thing that I really want you to do is learn more about this person, right? Once they join your community, start learning. You might know why they joined your community, because we all are there for a common reason, right? But what do they do outside of that? I just shared at the beginning of this presentation a talk about me being a colorectal cancer patient and that community that I belong to. Does that have anything to do with what I do for work currently? No. But if you knew that about me and could reach out and say, hey, Tim, I understand you're going through cancer, or that you got a liver transplant earlier this year. I have somebody else I know, or I'm really interested in learning more about that. Or I'm going through something similar. What advice would you have for me? Doing things like that, taking the time to learn more about them or pull more out from them so that you can have those conversations that don't directly impact what you're doing in your community, but help give them a greater sense of belonging and a reason to want to keep coming back in the community. I think that's so important when you do that. I think the other thing that we really need to do is we really need to look at, how we empower community members. So many times we think our job is over once the member joins. And if we don't empower them, the sense of belonging that we might have created during the welcome goes away. And that is why I'm just like, I'm so passionate about making sure that we understand this member and what their journey is going to be like through the process of them being part of this community. Because if we always keep them at the same level, they're probably going to get less and less active over time. And because they're feeling less and less a sense of belonging over time. And so, how can we help empower some of our community members to give them a greater sense of belonging? Right? Like, one thing that I've seen done is you ask people in your community, hey, will you take a bigger role? Right? Will you be a contributor? Or if you're maybe in a learning kind of community, maybe you can be a mentor for people, right? There's nothing more powerful than giving somebody the opportunity to have more power within the community. And I don't mean power like an ego trip thing. I mean power like responsibility. You give them more responsibility, they feel a greater sense of belonging because now they're actually not just a community member, they're actually contributing to the community. They feel that sense of belonging and responsibility to the community greater than somebody that's just a normal community member. So it's so important to be a contributor. You know, you can ask some of your community members maybe to be a speaker at an event, right? Daniel posted in one of the communities that we belong to, right? Asked if anybody had any knowledge and could speak on the power of belonging. I raised my hand. He elevated me up now to be a speaker in this community, which now I feel a greater sense of belonging in. It's that simple. You know, you can, you know, ask community members, because a lot of times as community managers, we always feel like we have to be the welcoming committee, but sometimes you can empower your community members to be part of the welcoming committee. You can empower them by getting them more involved. I've seen this through people who become, you know, moderators or admins within the community. I've seen this from people who get on planning committees for events that are coming up. I've seen it as people who go out of their way to help fundraise, you know, and lead the fundraising efforts for the community if you're like a nonprofit. So all these ways of getting people more involved really helps give them a greater sense of belonging. And it's not that everybody goes through this at the same pace or to the same extent, but understand that you don't want to force everybody to do the same thing, right? I don't want to force everybody to become a contributor. I don't want to force everybody to become a speaker. I don't want to force everybody to become my welcoming committee. I want to kind of learn about that community member, what they're interested in, what their goals are, and then give them the opportunities that really align with who they are as an individual and what their strengths that they have to offer are. What do they already have that I can tap into to help everybody in the community rather than just me telling them what my needs are? And I think that's so important. So, one other thing I have here is provide exclusive access. Now, when I was working at HuffPost, one of the things that we did was in our commenting community, some of our most valued commenters in the community had what we called they were pundit status. They mostly talked about politics. So in politics, we you know, pundit is an affectionate term. Sometimes affectionate, sometimes not, but that's beside the point. But that's what we call them. But as a result of them being a pundit, what we did was we gave them the ability to include links in their post, to have them, you know, format their text in italics and bold. We gave them the opportunity to have their comments bypass moderation and get immediately published. Those were huge, huge, huge things for a very small group of our community members. But that was so exclusive to that group that they had a sense of belonging and an affinity to our community more so than anybody else in our community. I also did a couple other things. We had about 150 people that had that exclusive office, access, the pundits. But among that 150, I had about a dozen that I actually had a very close relationship with, where they had my cell phone number and could call me anytime to have a conversation with me. And sometimes it dealt about HuffPost, sometimes it dealt about the comment or another user in the commenting community, but other times they just wanted somebody to talk to. And I gave them that access to me that not everybody else had. So that was another way that I gave exclusive access. And another way that I did is when I was at HuffPost Live, we had our set, that was, everybody saw where our hosts were, where the guests showed up, and all of our offices were right behind a glass wall of the set. So you could kind of see us in the background. But when I had community members visiting New York City, what I would do is I would invite them to come in and get a tour of the studio. And if they had a favorite host, I would make sure that I could, at least for like 10 seconds, introduce them to the host and just shake their hand or get a quick selfie with them. That's all it was. But that opportunity for that community member to actually get in and meet their favorite person that they saw on the screen all the time was so huge and so powerful that now they were some of our biggest fans, right? They were the ones who would do anything for us in the community because they felt like a sense of belonging that not everybody else had. It was exclusive to them. Nobody else got that opportunity. In reality, I did this for dozens and dozens of people that came in. But for each person, it was specifically for them. Different host, different person, everything. So very, very different. So I think the other thing that we really want to do to create a sense of belonging is looking at how do we go beyond what we just do in the community. Learn about them outside of your community. I already talked about this a little bit. But one thing that I will tell you is when I was at HuffPost, I found out from some of the commenters that I talk to all the time, they didn't say it in the commenting. They just messaged me directly and said, "Hey, Tim, do you know so-and-so? We learned that she's in the hospital and not doing too well." And I would say, "Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear that. Do you happen to know how long she'll be there?" And if they told me it was going to be over a week, I had the authority from my boss, our CTO, to be able to use our company money to order flowers to be sent to her hospital room with a note saying that we're all thinking about you and can't wait for you to get back online. Now, that just didn't do something with the person that we sent those flowers to. That got back to all the other people that she was friends with that were in the commenting community too. So now we just didn't create a greater sense of belonging for the person that was in the hospital. We created a greater sense of belonging because all the people that brought that to our attention knew what we did for this person now and actually felt a greater sense of belonging because they told us something and we took action on it. That's the type of thing that all of us can kind of do. The other thing I think is surprise and delight people, right? I can't tell you how many times in the community I've just given a shout out to somebody because they did the littlest thing, but the littlest thing for me could be a huge deal and I could get other people to want to replicate what they were doing for me. So I give them a huge shout out in the community. I give them all the credit for what they did. I talk about them. I don't plan it with them. I don't tell them I'm doing this. I just put them up there and let people know about it. Sometimes I do it outside of the community too. Maybe I'll put it on our company website, right? Like on the front page and say featured community member without telling them that I'm doing it. But after it's up there, I'll share it with them. It's not to promote things. It's just to really help them feel like a greater sense of belonging. Anytime you can do something little for a specific community member, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to be a big lift for you or your company or your organization. But anytime that you can do that, you've already raised above what everybody else in the industry is doing, which is what they have to do. Those little things elevate you up to the one that everybody else talks about. that other communities and other brands start talking about what you're doing, because you're doing that little extra that makes people feel surprised and delighted, and above all, creates that greater sense of belonging. Now, before I go into, I'm kind of going to finish up a little bit early here, Daniel, but I want to kind of, and I don't have a slide for this, so I'm just going to leave this up here. Well, let me show you a couple examples before I go into what I'm going to talk about. But I just wanted to share a couple other things here, just to show you some things that I'm talking about. So, like, there's one group that I belong to. And when I'm talking about like welcoming people, right? Are you seeing the Facebook group now, Daniel? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I can see it on the
screen. Okay, perfect. So this is just an example of welcoming people into our Man Up to Cancer group, which is for male cancer patients, right? Now, I specifically show this because what I want you to understand is this goes into not just welcoming these people and tagging them, right? But it goes into telling them what this group is, where are we at, who it's for, what we talk about in here and what we don't talk about in here. You know, we have 8 simple rules. We just tell them what those rules are. And then and we actually give examples for some of those things too. So what we actually do is we actually ask them to fill out a form so we can know more about them, right? We can start to understand where they live, to connect them with people that live in the same area as them. You know, what their email is, because Facebook doesn't always give us the email. So if we need to communicate with them, we can communicate with them. So that's just like one example of ways that we can welcome people in and give them a greater sense of belonging. I did have an example too here of, let me see if I can get this up. So here we go. So this is one. It's a community of community managers for talk-based friends. And one of the things that they did is they had this, what they call these 2-minute presentations. Now, all these 2-minute presentations were focused on topics that had nothing to do with community building, but something that the person that was a community manager was passionate about outside of community. And they did these 2-minute presentations. All these 2-minute presentations were done by members of the community. So when I said, how do you elevate somebody to be a speaker, right? Here's an example of each week for 15 weeks, they actually elevated somebody up to become a speaker. So with that being said, I will go back to my slide and just get into, well, I won't go back up on my slide yet, but I want to show you kind of what are some examples of things you should not do to create belonging. And I'm just curious, if you're watching right now, throw some ideas in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. I'm going to give a couple of my examples, right? One is we don't want our communities to become another marketing outlet, right? Even if it's a marketing community, we don't want them to feel like they're being marketed to or sold to. Now, how can we still do that without getting the people to feel, and the reason why I say we don't want to do that is I don't know anybody that gets a sense of belonging when they feel like they're being sold to or marketed to. Right? Like, if anything, that's a turn off, not a turn on. So when we do that, obviously it might be one of the major objectives for our community, but how can we do that in a way that actually gives the members a sense of belonging? Now, when I was with No Kid Hungry, what we did was we actually had what we called a social council. Now, each quarter we had one activation that the social council committed to help us with. And so each quarter we'd have a meeting with all the members of the social council. Now, granted, we had already done 95% of the work, right? We had given what our plan was going to be, what the strategy was going to be, what our goals were going to be, how we were going to go about doing it. But before we started doing it, we'd get this social council together and kind of review what we were planning on doing. We didn't tell them it was a plan that was set in stone already. We just said, here's some ideas that we have. We welcome them to give us some feedback on it, to give us some new ideas. And based upon what they told us, we actually tweaked it a little bit, or maybe added something in that they suggested, so that when the activation came to life, they felt like they helped create it. They only created like the 5% of it, right? But what we did was we gave them that sense of belonging. Now, how much different would that have been if we planned everything out and the day of activation we said, okay, social council, here's what we want you to do? It's so much different. It's so different. But you gave them that sense of belonging, like they were now part of what we were going to create. I think in sales, too many times I see, I belong to several communities, and I go on their public Facebook page and they have the same message that they just posted in their community. Now, why am I going to a community if I'm getting the same information that the general public can get anywhere else? There's no value in there for me. And that kind of loses the sense of why I want to keep going back to that community, right? I can interact with their public page all the time, but in the community, I want something different. I want something unique. It might talk about the same thing, but talk about it in a different way that's directed to the community instead of the general public. And so I really think that those are a couple things, but I don't know, Daniel, do you have any other ideas of things that really can be turnoffs, the things you don't want to do in a community to create belonging?
Okay, you rightly mentioned one, which is turning the community to a marketing outfit, marketing place. I think most members of community, given this region, wants the opportunity to push themselves, to sell their services. I think that's one turn off, to be honest. And keeping the community focused on community is a great approach. But today you've mentioned a lot of things that me thinking as you were talking. You've spoken about listening, you spoke about connecting, and you've spoken about empowering the members of the community. All right, so I have a question on my mind. Now, all of this calls the community leaders to evolve at all. So, considering your journey through cancer and then community, how has this called? And secondly, vulnerability and then and belong. For instance, within your cancer group, you're vulnerable to them. You don't need to. They accept, So how can community leaders come to that point of accept everyone or creating an act to encourage that such acceptance, basically?
Yeah, I lost the last part. You kind of cut out.
Oh, okay. So I was just talking about vulnerability and belonging to community, and I cited an example with your cancer group. You're vulnerable to them. They understand you. You don't need to. You are you with them. So how do community leaders come to that point of creating such environment of acceptance? Welcome back, Tim. Okay,
Sorry,
good.
I think it was my computer acting up on me here. So always at the best time, right?
It's fine. All right.
Yeah. So I was hearing you a little bit about like my journey and what I've kind of, if I got it, what I've kind of learned and how I've developed that into what I've been through as a member of these communities, how I've applied that to what I do in community.
Yes. How you've evolved.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, there's a couple ways that I've evolved. One is that, cancer doesn't care how good a shape you're in, how old you are, how young you are, what color your skin is. It impacts all of us. And I think in most communities, what we start to see is people that are similar to each other come together. And what being part of these cancer communities has done for me is help me see that sometimes we're missing some prime opportunities to connect with people that aren't like us, right? Like that don't look the same way, that
Yeah.
are way younger or way older than us. And a lot of times we just kind of dismiss them because it's comfortable, right? To be around people that are similar age to us, that believe in the same things as us, that look the same as us. But
Yeah.
cancer is one of those things that kind of helps break down those walls. And so I really think that it really has opened my eyes up to really being open to just about anybody who's out there and not turning people away just because they don't fit the normal, as we say in like the marketing and community space, right? The persona of our typical community member. So that's one way that I've evolved, is moving away from those personas and really start looking at the actual person and what their needs and goals are, and how do they fit the community because of that? And if so, let me help develop them and find somebody else, right? Like in my men's cancer group, it's primarily white men, right? But we have a couple, African American men. We have some gay men. And so it's like the more of those types of people that we can bring in helps other people like them feel like they can belong as well, instead of just us always keeping it in, people that look like me in the community. And so that's a great way that I've kind of evolved and developed a little bit. I think the other thing that it's really taught me is, when you have your community, it's really, and people say this all the time, right? Well, it's really easy to create a community around cancer because everybody knows they need something, right? They need to connect with other people going through something similar to you. And I think if we can get that in our community, it's not going to be as simple or as easy as like people having cancer, right? Or when I was working with No Kid Hungry, people would say, oh, it's so much easier to do it for a nonprofit like feeding hungry kids because, who can argue against that, right? There were people that could argue against it, but who would, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when we start looking at like what our purpose of our community is, right? What do we really want to provide for the community members? There's one element about what we want to do for our organization with the community. But then there's another thing that I really think we need to focus more on, which is what are we going to deliver to the members? What are they going to get out of it? And once we start doing that, I think we can we really get more valuable community members coming in, but we also are able to provide a greater sense of belonging because we're being crystal clear with them on why they're here. So those are two things I think that I've really developed through this whole process. And I think the third one, and I didn't bring this up, but I think it's so important. When I said I gave my cell phone out to, certain members at HuffPost, one thing that I will tell you is I had a relationship with these people. So if it was normally somebody that we never had any issues moderating their comments, they were good all the time. And then one day they got that we had to delete a comment, or, they were just doing something that was out of typical behavior for them. What I had the opportunity to do was reach out to that person and ask them, hey, normally you're like this. Today we're noticing something different. Is there something happening that I should know about? And when I do that, it let that person know that I actually not only saw them because they were doing something bad, I saw them for all this time that they were doing something good. Right. And so now I'm able to actually have that conversation. In this particular example, the person told me, what, they had something just happen in their life, like they just broke up with somebody, or a friend was pissing them off or something like that. And they were just in a foul mood. And they apologized to me. They said, maybe I should just get offline for a few hours. Now, normally we had a thing where we kind of put somebody in a timeout for a couple hours or an hour to kind of let them cool off before we let them back online. And we didn't have to do that because he told us he was going to do that to himself. Now, what kind of greater sense of belonging could I create in what could have potentially been a bad situation that got a member never to come back to the community again? But I actually paid attention and got to know what was going on with them. And during my cancer journey, one thing that I've seen this so many times, especially with men, it's, a lot of times we don't have anybody to talk to, right? Like we can't talk to our wives about it. We can't talk to our girlfriends about it. We can't talk to our friends about it that aren't going through cancer because they'll think we're weak and we're not manly enough, right? And so it's all about being in this safe space where I can actually ask you, Daniel, if you were in my cancer group, right? Like, hey man, you just vented off on something like this. I've never heard you talk about this. I wouldn't do this in the group, but I do it privately and just say, hey, did something happen? Tell me more about why, what caused you to be like that. And when you can share that with me and you feel an openness and I think, we talked about before being vulnerable, right? Like opening yourself up to feeling like, hey, I can talk to Tim because he knows everything that I'm going, he's going through the same thing that I'm going through. And I'm sure he's thinking the same thoughts on occasion, even if he doesn't voice them all the time. So it gives you that comfort level now to be able to be open. And instead of letting that build up inside of you or burying it deep inside where it becomes hardened and your insides become like a rock, you're now able to let that out and release it and not hold on to that and maybe go back to your family, later and go off on them because of something totally unrelated, just because you're holding on to something that's bothering you. And I think providing that opportunity and that space in your community, there's nothing more powerful that creates a sense of belonging than know that somebody can trust somebody else in the community to share something with. And that is, I think, I never really realized the true potential of that until I was in my cancer groups.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much for expounding all of these things to us here today. So Esther is asking a question in the chat. She says, what are the key elements that fosters a sense of belonging within a community?
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of them I went through, right? Like, I think you really need to listen, you need to connect, and you need to empower other people. I think those are the three key elements that go into it. Now, when we talk about that, right, that's easy for me to do as somebody who knows what I'm trying to accomplish. But how do you create that among other community members for other community members, right? And I think that's like the real challenge. And to do that, though, it's kind of like modeling the behavior, right? If you set the standard for how other people should act in the community, they're more likely to do the same thing. And so it's really about empowering those people to do what you've already shown in the community that creates that sense of belonging. So let's just give the example I said of creating a welcoming committee, right? And I showed you that one post that we had that welcomed all the members and did that. But now, and this community didn't have that, but what if we had a welcoming committee, right? Where you empowered other community members to actually welcome those individuals that were welcomed into the community. Now, you're probably not going to have 25 people each week or every other day like we do in our men's cancer group. But if you just have 5 people come in and you have 5 people on your welcoming committee, each one can welcome one person. And you just don't say, hey, welcome. You actually do what I talked about, and because you've done it before. And now you work with this committee to be your welcoming committee. You tell them, look up that person's profile, learn something about them, find a common bond. I don't know if anybody here has been trained in sales, and I'm dating myself now because I'm a little bit older, but when I was trained in sales many years ago, one thing that they always taught me was when you went into somebody's office that you look for something, either a book on the shelf, a picture on the wall, Or back in the day when you had, ashtrays on your desk, right? What were they smoking? Was it a cigar? Was it a brand of cigarettes? But what those told you was you could find a common bond with that person, right? Maybe I was reading the same book or had read the same book that was up on their shelf, or they had a favorite one of mine up on their shelf. Maybe they had a picture of fishing or golfing or something that I could relate to, or maybe they had a picture of going to another country and I could be like, oh, I've always wanted to go there, or I've been there before. What city did you visit? Things like that. And even to the cigarettes, right? It's like, oh, I used to smoke Pall Malls. Now I'm a Marlboro guy, So, I mean, it's like, it's all these types of things that you can form a bond with that person right away. And I think in the community, what you want to do is you want to look at, how can I really learn something about that person to create that connection right there? And then when you train your welcoming committee how to do that, now instead of just welcoming people, they're going to say, hey, I see you're from, St. Pete. You're just on the other side of the bay from me. What brought you, were you born here, or did you move here, and where did you come from if you moved? Those types of things that you have your community members start doing are, not only takes the workload off of you, but it gives that person, now they're not just connected with one person in your community, they're connected with 5 people in your community. And so doing things like that really help set the tone for how the behavior should be, and then working with your committees and your volunteers in the community to help them form that behavior is so powerful, because now when they're ready to go do something else after 6 months, a year, 2 years, they're going to train the next group that comes in, but they still know how to do it in their next role, and they're able to do the training so you don't have to. So it's kind of, once you set these things in motion, it's just a process of getting your community members trained. And the more you can do that, the more they're going to help each other out.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's interesting. Thank you so much. So you've mentioned a lot of things here today, and I think that community members can have that sense of belonging when they feel heard, when they feel there is a commonality between you, and when they feel like a safe space. So when community leaders are able to create a safe space of interest, members are able to connect to the power that belonging to a community gives them, and then both in expanding their own professional and business life, basically. So Esther says, as a beginner, what steps can one take to actively participate and contribute to a community, fostering a stronger sense of a shared purpose? And this will be our last question for today, basically.
Well, I love the question, and I could do a whole presentation on this too. But I'll just keep it really short. Is when I first started like networking and getting involved in finding which communities I wanted to be part of, one of the best ways I found to do it was not just to show up at the event, but to actually find out who organized the community and ask how I could help them, how I could volunteer to help. And one of the things I love doing, and I picked this up really early, and I was just lucky enough that one of the guys I reached out to said I could really use some help with registration. He kind of knew who I was already because I had been to some of his events, but he trusted me to handle his money for him. So he said, we do handle the registration. Most people are prepaid, but if not, some people might pay at the door. And I said, sure. But the reason why I loved working registration was you got to meet every single person that came through the door. And that was like one way that I loved doing that. I would volunteer to work registration all the time. But sometimes events don't need, that. Maybe they need somebody to help moderate like an online chat like this, right? And you can reach out to the event organizer and ask them, hey, how can I help out? I'm really interested in being a part of this. I want to help out and see what their needs are, and then do that. And I think when you're in a community, we all heard that, and if just online, we're not talking in person or online events, but you're just talking about like a community online, right? And you want to get more of that sense of participating. Don't wait for somebody to pick you to be able to start engaging. Start reaching out, start commenting on other people's stuff. Opening yourself up and being vulnerable will let people then respond to you. I found that, I always used to post when I did blog posts, I would always do like how to type of post. And the first time that I did a post that was not a how to, it was just kind of a lesson that I learned, right? And I really opened myself up to, what questions I had as I went through this situation, how I ended up dealing with it, then asking my community, right? Like, how would they have done something different? What would they have done if they were in my shoes? But when I opened myself up, not saying this is the answer I have, this is what everybody should do, but when I opened myself up to say, here's what I did, but here's why I'm not sure if it was the best thing. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I got a whole bunch of people responding to me. And so I think the more you become open and vulnerable with yourself in a community, the more people want to engage with you and get to know you more. And I think that, when you do that, whether you're somebody who's been in the community for a day or for 10 years, the person running the community will, because today it's so easy for people just to say whatever they want to say, especially online, right? It's free for us to say. We can hide behind our screen most of the time. It's like we get away with whatever, almost anything that we want to get away with. But if you can actually say that you want to do something and then follow up and do it in the community, people that run these communities pay attention to the people that do the actions of what they say. And when you do that, I can guarantee you that the person running that community is going to tap on you and want to know what else you want to do, how much more you want to get involved with, because there's not enough people stepping up to want to be volunteers in a community. And if you start doing the actions that show them that you're really serious about it, you will get really belonging to that community very quickly.
Wow, so much, Tim. It's been a really enlightening conversation with you today. And I want to thank everyone who has joined. And I believe that having heard all of this, we now have a better perspective of what it means to belong to a community and how we can embrace that power of belonging. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing from your wealth of knowledge. I hope we're able to keep in touch even after now, because you have a lot to impact on us. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today.
Well, thank you. And I'll just in the chat, I'll just go ahead and put the link to the presentation that's got my contact information. So if anybody wants to see it or get to the recording of it, they'll have that there for them too. So
yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. I will call it a wrap for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniel. Bye-bye.